Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Fernanda Texeira. I am a PhD student at the University of Manchester. I am based at the Work and Equalities Institute, that is part of the business school, believe me or not. But anyway, and so today I'm going to present a part of my PhD. My PhD research is focused on domestic work in Mexico. I am concerned with how the COVID and the platforms have changed the work conditions and employment relations in Mexico in this sector. So I think I have to sit, right? I think people are not seeing me.
I will see you.
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. Oh, okay, great. Okay, yeah, but you didn't need to sit. Yeah. Thank you. So, so today I'm going to present a part of my research that is focused on the platforms and how they have been changing the sector. And this is a work in progress. So, and it's based on a field work that I did early this year in Mexico City, where I collected some, when I did some interviews of them. So first of all, I think it's important to be clear about what I mean about domestic workers when I say domestic workers. So as we know, the definition of domestic workers can vary a little bit. So it can be sometimes problematic in academia because some researchers consider domestic work only cleaners, for example. In my research, I consider domestic work someone who provides paid services for a household, such as cleaning, driving, gardening, and among other activities. Similar to what we have seen in other sectors, such as transportation and food delivery, domestic work is also changing. Is under a very rapid process of platformization or Uberization, as some people like to call it. With a lot of location-based platforms emerging in this sector. And although we think this is a very new phenomenon that started in the last decade or so, actually the first platforms for hiring domestic workers have been around since 1997. But of course, it is in the last decade that this type of platforms became much more popular and really boomed. So this literature on platform is quite new. It is emerged in the last 4 or 5 years or so, and very few cases have been studied so far. There are some works focusing specifically in the case of the US, India, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, as Lorena is over there studying, and Germany, for example, as well. And the emerging literature have been focusing on the debate of the consequences of the emergence of these platforms to the workers. But there are some competing views over that, and some have pointed out the disruptive characteristics of the platforms, such as growing precarity and the introduction of new forms of online discrimination and harassment. And others have focused on the positive impacts of the platforms. The platforms can have on work conditions, such as contributing to the reduction of informality and increasing social protection coverage among domestic workers. So my research focuses on the impacts that the emergence of these platforms has had on domestic workers, as I said at the beginning. So I am concerned about how the work and employment relations and conditions have changed in Mexico or have not changed at all. I apply a feminist intersectional lens to understand how different intersectional identities can experience platform work in different ways. And for this study, I interviewed 24 domestic workers. Not all of them are working or finding work through the platforms. So kind of half of them are and half not. And this is important for my research because then I can compare how it is, how the experiences of those who are online looking for work differ from those in the traditional domestic work sector. And I also performed some content analysis of the platform websites and apps to help me to understand how they operate, their language, and so on. So before presenting my findings, I think it's important to introduce some background of the sector in Mexico. And like in many other Latin American countries, and the Caribbean as well, domestic work is an important source of income for many women in Mexico. Women represent about 94% of domestic workers. About 10% of them are 6 years or older. And although there are no official statistics on the number of internal migrants, there is a kind of consensus that they are the majority of this workforce. So we are talking about a local workforce and not a migrant workforce, as we see here in Canada, for example, or the US, or in the global north in general. And indigenous people are overrepresented in this sector. And again, there is no official data on the exact number of people of mixed backgrounds or with indigenous ancestry. But it's understood that they are the majority in this sector. And this is a very highly precarious sector with very high levels of informality and with a lot of serious labor abuses. It's very common to find cases of workers working very long hours with very low salaries, no employment benefits, and so on. And where episodes of violence, harassment at work are also very common. So as you can imagine, the situation has worsened during the pandemic. And as we know, this is a type of job that cannot be performed online or be performed from the employer, the workers' homes. So as happened in other places, many domestic workers in Mexico lost their jobs during the pandemic. And also those who kept their jobs had a reduction in the income, observed a work intensification as well, like working more hours for the same pay or having a heavier workload because employers were spending more time at home. So regarding the platforms, currently there are 6 platforms in operation in Mexico, but for the sake of the time, I'm going to focus on 2 of them, Aliada and Zovers. And Aliada has been for the past years the biggest player in this sector in Mexico. And Zovers, which was born in Argentina, it is currently also in Mexico and other places in Latin America. And as I will discuss in the next slides, these 2 platforms, they operate in a very different way, but they are quite interesting methodologically speaking, because they operate quite differently, but they can their impacts that they have on domestic work conditions, the work conditions for domestic workers, it's quite similar in some ways. And although in recent years, these platforms have seen a substantial increase in the number of workers and employers, their geographical presence is still limited to the capital and to few state capitals. And yeah, of course, this workforce is restricted to workers with internet access, who has a smartphone, and workers who have a certain level of digital literacy to use the apps, which has kept many workers away from the platforms. So how the platforms work? The first example is of Aliada. Aliada is an on-demand platform. This means that they rely in algorithmic management, like Uber, to do the client's worker matching. And but unlike Uber, the client's worker matching process on Aliada is not completely decided by algorithmics. So Aliada has in place a very simplified selection process for workers, which includes a criminal background check, something that is very common in this sector in the platforms. So once selected, the workers sign up on the platform and informs their availability and the fee they are going to charge per hour. And they are free to choose their fee within a range, but the platform recommends that they start at as little as possible in order to easily find work. And when the clients access the platform, they provide some information about the service they are requesting, such as address, weekly frequency, and the number of hours needed. And based on this information and also on the availability of the workers and the geographical proximity of the client and the worker, the platforms presents to the client 2 or 3 workers profiles that are available for this job. And these works profiles have the worker's photo, hourly rate, first name, and their rating. There is the how many times the worker received a 4 or 5 stars, and so on, and also comments made by the previous clients. The client then selects a worker based on this information and makes the full payment. That is, at this point, they pay aliadas fees and also the domestic workers fee. And the job is then confirmed and the worker receives a notification with the job details. And later, when the service starts, the worker informs the app and does the same when the job is finished. The second example is of Zovers. Zovers performs a selection process that is very similar to Aliada, so with no interviews, based only on reference and criminal background checks. And their matching process is quite different from Aliada because at Zovers, the client provides some information about the request service, such as weekly frequency and number of hours required. And then the platform returns with a code specifying how much is the Zovers fee and how much is the domestic workers fee. So Zovers sets the domestic workers fees. And at this point, the client pays the platform fee. And when the client pays the platform fee, Zovers creates a job ad and in a kind of an online job board. And then workers have access to this board, and then they can select the jobs they are interested in and apply for them. And the client receives the profiles of the workers who applied for the job. In the workers profile, the clients can see the worker's full name, address, years of experience, age, marital status, number of children, and ratings the workers received from previous clients. The client then, with this information, selects a worker, and after the job is finalized, the client will pay for the domestic worker fee directly to them, either in cash or by bank transfer. So Zover is not responsible for what happens outside the platform. It does not check whether the worker attended work or if the job lasted more than a few hours than agreed, and or if the client has paid the worker for their work. What they have in common is that they have this one-way review system. That is the review system that only the clients can rate the worker. So after the job is finished, the clients can give feedback on the worker by writing a review and assign then a rating from 1 to 5 stars. So some of my findings so far, it is clear that these platforms are reproducing the informal working arrangements that are a characteristic of this sector in Mexico. So workers do not have writing contracts with the platforms because they are because the platforms market themselves as intermediaries and not employers. So instead of referring to the workers as workers or employees, they use terms such as aliadas and Zovers to refer to the workers. Regarding the working hours, the platforms may have introduced more flexible working hours, although this is largely based on the intensification of work. That is, the workers on these platforms are expected to do the same, to do in 4 hours, the same number of tasks that they used to do in 8 hours in the traditional labor markets. On the other hand, some of the interviewees I talked to, they said that they feel that on the platforms, they are the owners of their own time, something that it's especially appreciated by those with caring responsibilities. Regarding the relationships between working hours and wage, almost all participants said that they work fewer hours for the same pay they received before joining the platform. And they also appreciate the fact that it's easier for them to find work close to their homes, which can help them to cut down the commuting costs and commuting time. However, this remuneration on the platforms is related to their productivity. So they are paid only for their active working time. which results in a variable remuneration, something that it's the literature, as the literature has pointed out, can bring a lot of insecurity and concerns to the workers. And as for the work mechanisms, control mechanisms, in the workplace, they are practically the same as we can find in the traditional sector. So it depends a lot on the type of manager that the client is. But what the platforms have introduced, as we saw in the case of Atelier, is a type of a digital management of time that has some positive impact on the reduction of unpaid overtime, according to the workers. And yeah, but again, the intensification of work seen in the platforms has also consequences for the workers' rest periods, because in order to get as many jobs as possible, they reduce the time they spend on meals and rest breaks. So, and also because of that, they are paid only for their active hours. They not have a weekly rest or annual leaves and things like that, paid annual leave. Regarding job security, it's quite interesting actually, because most of the literature on platform work has emphasized how platforms increase job insecurity, but the opposite may be happening in the case of domestic workers, because the workers I interviewed, they reported that because it was the main reasons why they joined or stayed in a platform is because it is easier for them to find jobs there compared to the traditional labor market. So they say they are always sure that they will find a job online. And this might be explained by the fact that unlike platforms in other sectors, such as Uber, etc., these platforms are not overpopulated with workers. That is, the demand may be still greater than the supply. On the social protection, again, these platforms are reproducing the old practices found in the traditional offline domestic work sector by not providing labor benefits, for example. They see it as a matter of negotiation between the client and the worker. And about related to violence harassment at work, workers' personal data is displayed to the potential clients, may result in discrimination, as is clearly the case in Zovers, right? Because they have access to marital status, number of child, etc. And as some researchers have argued, these can lead to discriminatory practices in the hiring process. But at the same time, we need to recognize that this is not a novelty in the sector. This is it's something very common in Mexico to ask this kind of information to a potential worker. So the employer commonly asks this kind of this information. And also the traditional placement agencies, they also ask for this information to the workers. And overall, workers feel safer in a job found through the platforms. The fact that the platform holds some information about the clients make them feel safer. Thank you. Although the workers I spoke to, they recognize that clients do not go through the same level of information checking as they do. But if something goes wrong at the workplace, there are no dispute resolution process in place. So, and based on what some workers told me, the platforms tend to ignore their complaints. Besides that, when there are disputes between workers and the platforms, some participants stated that they or their colleagues were blocked from the platform because they were labeled as people who complain too much. So I have only 2 minutes, but yeah. Also, one-way rating systems can trick workers into accepting anything in order to keep their 5-star profile. And I was planning to give you a very brief overview of what happened in the pandemic, but just to let you know, basically the same thing that happened in the traditional labor markets, right? It was quite difficult for them to find jobs during the during the pandemic. The platforms did not offer to the workers enough protective equipment or training, and and also this is quite interesting actually. Aliada said to the clients that they should continue paying the domestic workers during the pandemic in order to support the domestic workers in this period, in this crisis period. And but the interviews that I did, the people who I talked to, they said they never saw this money. So basically the employers paid for the platform to support the workers, but they never received this money. So this is quite serious. And to conclude, platforms are reproducing many of the old inequalities found in the traditional offline sector. But at the same time, they are also introduced some few positive changes. But so I believe what we should be very cautious and avoid a kind of a binary view of the platforms, of course. But the question is, the positive change they are introducing are enough to really change the work conditions of workers for better. For me, it seems that there are a massive gap between what the platforms in the sector they promise in terms of improving the work sector, the work conditions, and what they really offer to the employer or to the workers. And also, of course, it is clear that more research is needed. Some of the academics findings on platform work in general in other sectors may not necessarily apply to domestic workers. As we know, much of the literature on platforms have been focusing on male-dominated sector, and some of the findings not apply. So yeah, I'm gonna finish here because I don't have enough time to discuss more, but I look forward for your questions and we keep this discussion. Thank you very much.